What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. It's Wednesday, so time to go over the wide receivers you guys have been asking about. Before we do that though, have to start things off with the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was there are 16 running backs so far this season that have been able to score 9 total touchdowns or more, of course. And only one of them is ranked outside the top 20 in fantasy scoring. I asked you who it was, and the answer is Todd Gurley, who's actually no longer the starting running back on the Falcons. And Jace was the first to get that one right. Today's stat: Calvin Ridley, Tyreek Hill, and DK Metcalf rank 1st through 3rd in air yards per game, but who ranks 4th? All right, so the players you asked me to go over this week are Amari Cooper, Adam Thielen, Emmanuel Sanders, Marvin Jones, and then Lynn Bowden again. So we will first go over Amari Cooper. He actually had 5, I don't want to say elite games, but relatively decent performances in a row before the massive dud this last week. He gained 3 total yards on 3 targets and 2 carries. I believe the 2 carries were for like -7 yards, and then I think he turned the 3 targets into 2 receptions for 10 yards. Other than the obvious drop-off in talent, of course, the big difference between Dak and Dalton is the target shares. Dak really leaned on Cooper, and so when you have a much better quarterback also leaning on this one receiver, yeah, he's going to post some absolutely monster stat lines. But Dalton is spreading the ball around a lot more than Dak did, and that's not going to benefit Cooper because he sees a drop-off in overall talent and then an even further drop-off in the overall target share. So Cooper is still the best wide receiver on the Cowboys, but at least right now, he's not being targeted like a true alpha. And again, that's not even talking about the total targets. It's just talking about his target share is not that of an alpha wide receiver, while Dalton is the quarterback. So because of that, he's going to have games where we see the targets dip down to 3, even in a game that, like, this wasn't a blowout. This was very, very close for the entire game, and so you would have thought that the targets would be there. And then we go to this week, they're facing the Eagles, which is sort of a mixed bag. So when Slay is healthy, of course, this is a brutal matchup. But recently, it has been kind of a soft matchup because he has been dealing with an injury, he's had a concussion, and so when we see Slay limited or out, the Eagles aren't that great of a pass defense, or at least for alpha receivers, you can definitely shred them. But when he's healthy and active, of course, it's a really difficult matchup, and Slay is a corner that Amari has struggled with. So I would say injuries are the biggest news here for starting or sitting Amari Cooper. Because it's not even only Slay, it's Gallup. Like, Gallup is dealing with a hip pointer. His status is in question. I don't want to call him like definitely in, definitely out. I think it's up in the air. If you had to make me guess, I would still guess towards Gallup playing, but I mean, it's Tuesday when I'm recording this. We're going to get a lot more news on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then I'm pretty sure we'll know his status going into Sunday. But let's just say that Slay is out and Gallup is out. Well, then I think Amari is like a really, really solid play as a wide receiver too, and he's going to have a decent amount of upside and a relatively high floor. But if Gallup is back and Slay is back, and we think Slay is going to be good to go, because this last injury for Slay was the concussion, so he'd been dealing with lower body injuries, but the concussion, he can come right back and be really good. If he was coming off a leg injury, well, then it's maybe a little bit different. Maybe we're like, oh, is he 100%? Once he's back from the concussion, he should be 100%. So if he's active this week, we should assume, unless he picks up another injury, that he is 100%, and it would turn into a difficult matchup for Cooper. So if that's the case, and then at that point, I don't really care if Gallup is in or out. If Slay is back, I think Cooper is an okay play, but he'd be much more of like a low end 2, maybe someone you put in the flex, but someone that would absolutely be okay with benching. Next up, we've got Adam Thielen, and he's had sort of an up and down season, but these last 2 weeks have definitely been closer to the down. He's only got 5 receptions for 50 yards and a score over the last 2 weeks combined, and that's on 7 targets. I mean, he had 6 of 11 games leading up to that, at least 7 targets in a game, not 2 weeks combined. And so these are also his 2 lowest target games on the season. Now, did come in 2 tough matchups, the Bucs and the Bears. I mean, these aren't easy teams to throw on, but they play the Saints this week, and that's obviously not an easy matchup as well. The Saints have one of the best defenses in the league. Also, since week 11, Justin Jefferson's averaging 9.8 targets per game compared to 7.2 for Thielen. And if we only include the games where both of them played, it's still a 2 target per game lead for Jefferson. Now, Thielen still does have the lead in the red zone, so when they get close, they do still prefer throwing the ball to Thielen, so that is a positive. But it kind of seems like more and more targets are going to Jefferson, and that is a little bit concerning if you own Thielen. As for starting Thielen, obviously it's going to come down to who he has. Just check the rankings, but I do have a little bit more faith in Thielen than I do in Amari Cooper, and it's mostly because of a combination of the target share and the matchup. Now, the target share simply saying that if they're going to throw the ball, most of that production is going to Thielen, Jefferson, and Cook. A little bit to Irv Smith, a little bit to the ancillary weapons, but mainly going to those 3.5 players, we'll say. But also the matchup. It's close to impossible to run on the Saints, and so while the Vikings are going to try their absolute hardest to do so, it's definitely possible that they can't get Dalvin Cook going and that they need to throw on a much higher percentage of their plays than they would like to. Now, we talked about this in the Bucs game with the Vikings. We were saying that that exact same thing is possible. If they can't get Dalvin Cook going, they're going to need to throw the ball more. Well, they kind of did get Dalvin Cook going a little bit, and then their offensive line struggled immensely to stop the pass rush of the Bucs, that they just couldn't get the ball going through the air. Is that possible again against New Orleans? Absolutely. But it's another situation. It is entirely possible that Dalvin Cook cannot get going, that the Saints command a lead in this game, and that they force the Vikings to throw the ball on a very high percentage of their plays, and that's definitely going to benefit Jefferson and Thielen. So I will say the ceiling is definitely higher, and I do think the floor is higher than it is with Amari Cooper, and so I have more confidence in him than Cooper. I'd say Cooper, like I said, more of a low-end 2 to a flex play. I would put Thielen more as like a mid-range 2, someone that you should probably feel decent about at the 2 spot, but knowing that I guess under these circumstances this week, the floor is a little bit lower than usual, but the upside is absolutely still there, especially the touchdown upside, because like I said, they love using him in the red zone. Let's stay with that game and go over Emmanuel Sanders. As I'm sure you guys know, Michael Thomas was placed on the IR before the last game in an effort to get him 100% for the playoffs, because now he'll miss the rest of the regular season, but he will be there in the playoffs. That is probably the correct move for the Saints, even if it might be a little bit annoying in fantasy. Like it was the right move for them. But on top of the Thomas injury, we see Traquan Smith also get injured last week. I don't know how severe his ankle injury is. We kind of learned these things on Wednesday, so maybe by then you guys will know. But if Traquan also misses, then Sanders is in a smash spot as the very clear alpha wide receiver. And honestly, I think he's even a good play if Traquan Smith is back. I mean, yes, Breeze looked just horrible to start last week, but he definitely got into a groove more mid and late into the game, and they were facing the Chiefs. And so they're going to get a much easier opponent this week. The Chiefs also are very good at limiting production to wide receivers. And I'm not saying that the Vikings are like a horrible defense, but they're much more attackable, especially to wide receivers, than the Chiefs are. And plus, Breeze will have another week to get healthy. Obviously, Breeze wasn't even close to 100% last week. If we get him a little bit closer to healthy, we downgrade the matchup a little bit. We still have all these weapons out for the Saints. I mean, Emmanuel Sanders could absolutely explode. I think he's a wide receiver too. Honestly, I don't even care if Traquan plays. If Traquan is out, he is a locked-in wide receiver too. But if Traquan plays, I still think Emmanuel Sanders is a wide receiver too this next week. He is pretty clearly targeted over Traquan Smith. Breeze will be a little bit more healthy, and I think he's going to have a pretty decent floor. They got to move the ball somehow, and he's got a really high ceiling, especially if he can hit on a deep play. So I think he's a solid play this week if you picked him up. Another wide receiver that I would strongly consider using is Marvin Jones, and it's actually for a lot of the same reasons as Emmanuel Sanders. I doubt that Golladay returns this season, and Stafford will be another week removed from his injury, kind of like Drew Brees. And, it clearly had an impact on him last week. Like, both Brees and Stafford, they were back, but, they weren't even close to 100%. So if they can get a little bit more healthy this week, that's going to benefit their weapons, obviously. He also gets a matchup with the Bucs, and like we just ran over with the Vikings, that was a matchup that we were looking at a few weeks ago and saying it is possible that the Vikings passing attack explodes because you just can't run on the Bucs. I mean, the Vikings ended up doing decent, but they didn't dominate on the ground. If we go to the Lions, there's no way the Lions get it going on the ground. Now, if Matt Patricia was still the coach, I would have a little bit of concern, not only because he's the worst, but I mean, he's an idiot. Like, he would try and run the ball 30 times for 31 yards, and he would just keep trying it even when it's not working. But they've opened up the offense a lot since getting rid of him, and they've become much more aggressive. And I really think if DeAndre Swift doesn't come out really hot in this game, that Matthew Stafford and Marvin Jones could erupt. Just like Marvin Jones did last week. Stafford didn't end up going off, but I mean, we could see another game that's like 10 for 130 and multiple touchdowns for Marvin Jones this week. And again, we talked about how soft of a matchup the Titans were. Like, I'm not saying the Bucs are a bad defense, but if they got to throw the ball a ton, they're attackable through the air. And Marvin Jones is pretty clearly the top option in this receiving game. So, especially with a healthier Matthew Stafford, this is a blow-up spot for Marvin Jones, and I would try my hardest to get him into your lineup. The final receiver to go over today is Lynn Bowden, and I've actually been getting a lot of requests to go over him these last 2 weeks. I think you guys are just a tad too excited to play him. Bowden wasn't one of these rookie wide receivers / running backs that we were really excited for and really expecting to break out. He's definitely an asset to the team if they can use him properly. You have to use him correctly, but he's not, CeeDee Lamb, Judy, Jefferson, Rager, Higgins, etc. Like some of these guys that we were like, they're going to break out. Whether it's this season or next season, at some point, they're going to break out. Player Profiler has the most compared to Deebo Samuel, and I think that's a really good comparison. Like the Dolphins and really any team, like they're not using Lynn Bowden as an alpha. He's never going to be that. He's much more of a player like Deebo Samuel that they want to use close to the line of scrimmage. They want to give him carries. They want to use him on screens, really short routes. And while that's going to boost his catch rate, like if he has 8 targets, he might catch 7 or 8 of them, it limits his ceiling, especially when he has 0 targets in the red zone. I think Bowden will be a very interesting player to talk about next season, especially if he can start over Grant. Like if he's starting every play, it'll be interesting. He'll be kind of like a Deebo Samuel, but he's not Deebo Samuel yet, and it's an extremely thin play to consider in the fantasy championships. I understand that he has 16 targets over the last 2 weeks, and even catching 13 of those, he only has 119 yards. He hasn't scored. The one reason that I would give you a pass for playing him is if you kind of went with like an RB0 approach. So if you grabbed like Adams, Kelsey, Mahomes to start your draft, and then you took a bunch of the mid-range wide receivers and you're like, I'll figure out running back, and it's a full PPR league, you waited till the end, you don't have a ton of running backs on your roster, and again, it's a full PPR league, and you're allowed to use Bowden at running back. That's very key. And during like a 12 or 14 team league, then I'm definitely fine with it, because if the rest of your roster is awesome and you're just looking at running back 2 saying, I don't care if he only catches his 7 targets, catches maybe 6 of them for like 40 yards. That's 10 points at running back. I'm good with that. If that's the case that you're in, well, absolutely. Then you can definitely play him. This is a relatively soft matchup against the Raiders. But I would not be using him at wide receiver. I would not be using him in a half PPR league. And I would not be using him in a 10-team league pretty much under any circumstance, unless you've just got like mass injuries these last few weeks, which is definitely possible. We've seen some running back injuries. If that's the case, maybe. But again, I prefer to use him at running back, preferably at running back 2, deeper format, 12 or 14 team league, and preferred in full PPR over half, and definitely not in standard. Also, it would be much preferred if Parker and Grant are out, but at least if Grant is out, because if those two return, then we really don't know what his snaps are going to be. But if they remain out, then we can feel pretty good that his role is going to maintain the same. Again, I'm recording this on Tuesday, so I don't know yet, but check that later in the week. If, Gesicki's back, Parker's back, Grant's back, it's a really, really thin play, and I prefer not to do it in the championships. So I hope that was helpful for a lot of you. We still have the running back and the wide receiver start-sit videos over the next 2 days. So if you have more questions on players, then it might be answered in those. But that, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, then how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.